This video is part 2 of the Chapter 17 information. The first part was going over some of the general things as far as what human resources is really all about, and the job that they're responsible for. In this video, we're going to be going over performance reviews and also pay, which tends to be a huge thing that most people are concerned about and are interested in. Now, the thing about performance management, as I mentioned in the first video, it is something that's supposed to be a year-round thing. Too many people have a tendency to think of performance management as just the performance review. It's not. The performance review is the end of the entire process. Performance management has to take place throughout the year, where at the beginning of the time frame, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, here are the expectations, here are the goals. Throughout that time frame, as a manager, you should be giving folks feedback, coaching as far as what it is that they're doing, letting them know how well they're doing as far as the expectations. As a manager, what I would do, we had a yearly process, and what I would do is once a quarter, I would give the forms to the associate, and I would have the form, and we would each fill it out on our own, and then we sit down and compare notes. The whole idea behind that was the person may be doing something that I didn't really understand or know, and it's something that should be included in the performance review as a success that they've had or something along those lines. But I did it quarterly so that people knew exactly where they stood, because I'd sit there and say, okay, if I were doing the performance review at the end of the year right now, this is what I would be seeing. And it would give us a good conversation as far as what was actually going on, and they knew where they stood, what it is that they had to do to improve, what they should be doing to continue, things like that. So that at the end of the year, we'd sit down for the final performance review for the year, the formal one, and they'd sit there and go, yeah, I know. In other words, there were absolutely no surprises. And so when you start thinking about performance management, that's really the process that you want to do. First of all, no surprises. Don't surprise anyone. I had a situation one time when I was at Hallmark. I had set up goals as far as here are the things that I'm going to be doing over the year. I was going to be working on this one project. During the year, the project had been canceled. I couldn't do anything with it. All right. At the end of the year, my boss, my manager, slammed me for not completing the project. I said, but wait a minute, Steve, it was canceled 6 months ago. He said, doesn't matter. You didn't complete it. And so it was a huge surprise to me. So you don't want any surprises. You don't want to treat anybody like that. Now, there are different ways of handling the performance review. This is one type of appraisal review, and personally, I think it sucks. First of all, it's like, okay, so here are your grades, unsatisfactory, meets or exceeds expectations, and then here are the areas of performance. It doesn't explain what unsatisfactory or meets expectations or exceeds expectations really mean. It doesn't say what kind of computer skills might be necessary. It doesn't say what kind of assigned work needs to be completed or anything like that. This is terrible as far as I'm concerned. This is just an easy way to give people a little bit of information and to make sure that you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's for HR. This one is a little bit better, all right, where it says, okay, what does outstanding mean? And it explains that for outstanding, superior, average, this sort of thing. And then it has the various areas as far as what's being assessed: job knowledge, initiative, quality of work, and it kind of gives a brief description as far as what those things are. Again, this isn't all that great because it doesn't really give you details as far as what they mean by job knowledge. Plus, the question I have is, are these really the things that the person should be assessed on? It's like in a writing class, assessing somebody on their speaking skills. It doesn't make any sense. So are these really the right things? This one's a little bit better than the first one, but still, it's not very good. This one is an example of what's called a BARS, B-A-R-S, Behaviorally Anchored Rating System. BARS, B-A-R-S, Behaviorally Anchored Rating System. What you're doing is you're identifying the behaviors that are necessary. In this one here, you'll see that it has a little bit more information as far as what the various quote-unquote grades are. I mean, there's more detail as far as what they mean by exceptional and very effective and this sort of thing. And then what they have is, okay, so what are the areas that you're being judged on? In this case, now this is just the first page of a multi-page document. Focus on results. And then what it does is it gives you the behaviors that go along with what they really mean by focusing on results. Quality and reliability. And then what it does is it gives you the behaviors as far as what they mean by quality and reliability. This is much better than the previous ones because the person knows better as far as what they were actually doing and how it is actually being rated as far as exceptional, very good, very effective, that sort of thing. So this one's better. Now, by the way, many times you'll see the quote-unquote grades, okay, or the evaluation level as far as the people are concerned. Most HR then develops what kind of merit increases are going to be provided based on the grades that are being given. So this is like, an A and a B and a C and this sort of thing. And what they'll do is they'll set up their process that says, okay, the exceptionals get like a 6% raise, and very effective might get a 4% raise, and effective might get a 3%, needs improvement and unsatisfactory 0, or something along those lines. And so many times the purpose of the performance review is to justify what kind of grades or what kind of raises people are going to be getting. The last form of performance review I'd like to share with you is what's called a 360 feedback. That's one of the things that the book talked about, was the 360 feedback. At the pharmaceutical company, we went to this kind of a process. It was 360-degree feedback. In other words, you were getting feedback not only from your boss, also your peers, your customers, things like this. In other words, all the people around you. And we got away from grades like this. So you didn't have, outstanding, very good, good, fair, poor, or anything like that. It was just pass, fail. Pass, fail. If you passed, then you would get a merit increase. And it was up to the manager to decide and be able to justify why you were getting X% as far as a merit increase. If you failed, then you were put on a performance improvement plan. So what we did was we just said, okay, it's a pass-fail. Because what was happening was everybody was getting outstandings and a few very goods. Nobody was getting goods. Good was not good. Everybody was getting outstandings and a few were getting very goods. And so what we did was we went to a pass-fail. You pass, that's great. Now the manager has to determine and justify how much of a raise you're actually going to get based on that. In other words, it wasn't being based just on this. Our 360-degree feedback process was one of those where throughout the year, I would collect data and information and feedback from my customers. In other words, all the people that I was facilitating, all the people that I was doing internal consulting with, that sort of thing. I'd get finished with the project, I'd solicit the feedback, I'd hang on to it. Then at the end of the year, I would share all that feedback with my boss. I would write up what my performance would be, and then my boss would write up what she saw that performance as. I loved this process. And the reason is because there were so many things that I was doing that my boss really didn't know that I was getting into. And it was the feedback that she was getting from the other people who actually helped as far as my performance review was concerned. And so this was the last one. And what you did was we didn't have forms like that. It was all text, where the manager would write things up and the employee would write things up and that sort of thing. And what I would do is I would list out, here are all my accomplishments over the year, and then also the feedback that people were giving me. And so you can see I had done all kinds of stuff as far as facilitation, as far as teaching classes, as far as the technology, as far as our intranet site, the personal development aspects, speaking at national conferences, things like this. And so I absolutely loved this process because I was getting so much better feedback than what was done before. Then you have to get into the compensation philosophy. Okay, so again, how are you going to put together your compensation? How are you going to make sure that you're attracting and keeping the talent that you need? Most times, what organizations will do is look at the market, thinking about the market that they're actually drawing their talent from, because you're in competition to get all of the good talent. And you have to think, okay, where do we want to be within that market? Do we want to be a top payer within the market? Do we want to pay just market rates? Or are we going to basically do a turn and churn as far as the people that we're hiring? And so this is something that you have to decide as an organization based on your strategies, based on the dollars you have to spend, things like that. When I was at Marion Labs, our philosophy was we wanted to be at the 95th percentile of the top, or 90th percentile of top pharmaceutical firms. We didn't want to be the top payer, but we wanted to be up there where we were very competitive as far as getting the top talent was concerned. So we wanted to be at the 90th percentile of premier pharmaceutical companies. Now, a lot of companies will sit there and say, hey, we're going to pay just market rates. That's cool. Some will pay a little bit more. The more premier companies will be doing that. So the organization has to determine what their compensation philosophy is going to be. Then when you think about the jobs themselves, what happens is they will have a range for each of the jobs. And what they'll do is for a particular job, they'll have a midpoint. What they're doing is they're gathering information from all of the companies that they're competing against and also the area companies and looking at similar jobs and saying, okay, what are you paying? What are you paying? What they'll do is they'll kind of set their pay philosophies based on that. And then they set up their pay scales. They'll have a midpoint as far as what it is that job will be paying. What they typically try to do is get people to and keep them at their midpoint range. As a person is in a job for a certain length of time and they're doing well and things like that, they'll move up as far as that job pay scale is concerned. And they might say, okay, we will pay a minimum of 80% of the midpoint or 120% of the midpoint. At this point right here, you hit that top end, you basically, quote unquote, get redlined. In other words, the only raises and things that you'll be getting are cost of living raises. Because what happens is each year, because of inflation, what happens is the midpoints and everything go up a little bit. So what'll happen is you'll have it here. The next year, what'll happen is it'll move up a little bit as far as where that midpoint is and that the entire range is. And then the next year, it'll move up a little bit more. And so that's typically what happens within an organization. When people are hired, what they typically do, companies do, is try to get them in here as far as hiring them, so that it gives them room for flexibility. As they're there for 1 to 2 years, they're getting up and getting larger raises to get to the midpoint. Once they hit that midpoint, the size of the raises gets a little bit smaller. And the reason is because they don't want you hitting way up here and then getting redlined. This demonstration right here also works for the various jobs within the organization. So, for example, when I went to Hallmark, I was hired in as a Scheduler 2, and it had a range like this. They also had, as far as promotional opportunities, a Scheduler 3. And the range would have been something like this. In other words, it would have had a higher range. So if I was here and I got it at my midpoint and I got a promotion to Scheduler 3, I would get a raise that goes with it, and I might be at here. So what's happening is I'm continuing to chase that midpoint. And so this is one of the things that companies do as far as their pay scales is concerned when they're looking at levels in the organization, where you'll have this level here, here's an increase to here, here's an increase to here. As far as a promotion is concerned, one of the things that they do not want to do is have somebody who is here and then get a big promotion several steps up at once, where they're having to give a huge increase to try to get them up in here. Because if you'll notice, the midpoint here isn't even in that range. So they try to make it so that you're going up basically a step at a time and you're not missing steps. These are some key points when you start talking about performance management and pay. Give me a shout if you have questions.